We asked families from around the country to think about what it means to get older and took them on an immersive journey 30 years into their futures to see what life might be like.
It's like stepping into a different world.
Everything looks really foggy.
You got me with the aging makeup.
Well, that's a trip.
All of them considered, if they knew now what they'll know then, would they change anything?
I'm still there. I'm still going to be Susan.
So that was the trailer for the documentary Fast Forward, which we will be talking about later on today. Now, did you guys know that over 10 million millennials are caring for loved ones? I am one of them, so hi. Allow me to introduce myself. I am Jacquelyn, I stutter. I like to start out by saying that so that you guys don't think your Wi-Fi is acting up. But I became a millennial caregiver in my late 20s. And after 4 years of caregiving, I felt so lonely and thought I can't be the only one. So I began documenting the experience of caring for my mom with Alzheimer's on TikTok and Instagram under the handle Mom of My Mom, because I was essentially a mom to my mom. And I realized that I wasn't by myself. In fact, there are now about 420,000 people who follow our page, many of whom felt lonely and isolated. And I'm so happy to create a community for them. So let's do a little housekeeping. This event would not be possible without the support of the John A. Hartford Foundation, the Gordon Betty Moore Foundation, and our fantastic co-sponsors, Caring Across Generations. Now, let's introduce the panelists. Eric Michael Hertig, award-winning director of Fast Forward and founder of FXL Entertainment. Ishita Srivastava is the director of cultural change with Caring Across Generations. Ronnie Snyder, Vice President of Programs at the John A. Hartford Foundation, and Dre Campbell, who fast-forwarded in the film with his father. So let's jump right in. Eric, you are an award-winning filmmaker and could have made a film about anything. So why a film about aging?
Thanks, Jacquelyn, and thanks to everybody who's joining us this evening. Why a film about aging? I, myself, as a filmmaker, have always been really fascinated by this idea of time travel and the possibility that someone might go to the future or into the past and bring some kind of special knowledge back to the present and change their lives. And as we were doing research, we came across MIT's Agnes aging suit, which for anybody that's seen the film or the trailer has seen this really interesting looking suit that in actuality helps create an apathic response from people who try it on. And we saw this and we thought, here's a tool to really take people into the future and explore their aging. This is perfect for television. This is perfect for film. And one of the central ideas around people watching any kind of media about aging or even thinking about aging is for a lot of people, it provokes a lot of fear. And so the suit, along with all of these other experiences that we've created for the film, helped to put a fresh face and take a fresh approach to aging. And we hope has helped start a new kind of conversation, which can be more proactive and a lot more, we can have some fun. We can talk openly about things. And so those are basically the reasons why we strove to get this film out there.
Dre wear that suit was just so real. So
Yeah.
Dre, when you had fast forwarded, what was that like?
From highs, so sorry, I was muted. Talk about a range of emotions from highs to lows. It was a very interesting experience all across the board. Even just the idea of shooting film for a week. If anyone's ever done that behind the camera, that's an experience itself. But wearing the suit was eye-opening. It really created a sense of empathy in me. Altruism, I've never really experienced what it was like to, I mean, obviously none of us have, right, to be older than ourselves. And I think sometimes it's easy to look back at my younger self and want to go back, but to know what it's like to kind of feel to be your older self was an interesting experience, because it's essentially, I kind of know on some level, at least physically or biologically, on what it will be like to age forward. And so that was interesting. I think it was a grounding experience. Afterwards, I've encountered people just at social events or in business who are older than I am, and in this process, and I can have a little more empathy. I mean, it creates patience, right? There's movement that is slower sometimes, and looks, and just understanding also the empathy of the end of life fears. And after going through this process with my dad in particular, and looking at kind of how I think fear played out in a little bit of this process, and seeing how it worked out, it gave me an empathy and an understanding that I did not have before I did it. So it was fun, exciting, hard, sad, challenging. It was a wonderful experience. It's a holistic event, I would say.
These experiences are so helpful to have, because we all will end up caring for someone. My next question is for Ishida. As the Director of Cultural Change, why is it important to have more storytelling focusing on issues of care?
So I work at a national organization called Caring Across Generations in the US, and we do policy change, but we also do what we call culture change around issues of aging and caregiving specifically. We do sort of policy work to make sure that people who need care are supported and can access the care they need, but also so that caregivers are supported. And so we think that part of what is missing in our culture is that we don't, caregiving is not visible and valued. And we don't have open, honest conversations about aging and death. And care has primarily been done by women and women of color historically inside homes, and it's kind of invisible. And so we think that we need to shift cultural and social norms so that care becomes valuable and visible, but also so that we start thinking about caregiving as not just an individual private problem that people should just figure out on their own, but actually as a collective social issue that needs kind of collective solutions, community solutions, but also probably like infrastructure solutions. And so storytelling is the best way to try to change social norms, to try to have conversations that aren't happening yet. And so the work we do is supporting films like this, but also producing all kinds of content, whether it's sort of pop culture or nonfiction or on social media, just to kind of try to shift the idea that care is something that you deal with when you have to deal with it in the privacy of your home. It's your problem to figure out rather than kind of a community issue, which we believe it is and should be.
Everything that you just said resonated with me so hard. So, Ronnie, my next question is for you. How did the film resonate with you and the work that you do?
Thanks. Really, this film resonated with me and the work that I and we do at the John A. Harper Foundation every single day. It's great because it shows people like Dre who are asking their parents questions, who are wanting to engage and explore and really show that they're helping. Also, and the film shows this too, it's not a single conversation. It's not one and done. The best process really comes when you have multiple opportunities to discuss things at different times when they come up. And ultimately, of course, it's a parent's decision as to what matters most to them and what works best for them. Parents, all of us, have the right to make our own decisions. And it's really important to love them and support their choices. But the most important thing really is communication. It's the ability to open the door to conversations about decisions. Because, most of us, most families don't really want to stop and think about what it means to grow older.
Mm-hmm.
You're absolutely right. Talking about this part of our life is, I think, so important. And one of the things that I wish that my mom and I had the time for. Since we weren't able to, it left me completely in control of everything and just figuring it all out, which was daunting. And so we have a few more questions about how to converse with family. And so let's see a video question.
In the film, all of the participants had already identified their primary caretakers for when they would be needing care. And I'm wondering how those conversations usually go, especially when there might be multiple siblings living far apart from their parents and in different cities and in different states. I'm wondering if you have any tips or advice for how to approach those conversations. Thank you.
What thoughts do any of you have on that?
Well, I'll jump in. I think one of the things that's really important is good communication between siblings and others who are involved. It's really incredibly helpful to be able to put your heads together to support each other. You can do things like make a sibling schedule for visits, whether they're local visits or visits from people from different states. It may be that one sibling is nearby and is able to move in or find work that they can do from home when there's really hands-on caregiving. But either way, another way to address the issue is really when you get to know the neighbors and friends who are part of a parent's world. The ability to know people who are local, who can alert you to issues, problems, concerns, and really coordinate then with you, with siblings and others. And I'll just add that there are resources in one's community. There are resources at the Alzheimer's Association, on AARP's website, and there's an online resource called the Best Practice Caregiving, which is a tool for healthcare and community-based organizations to find certain vetted dementia programs to help family caregivers. So there's lots of resources out there. They can be hard to identify, but absolutely worth searching for.
Yeah, I'll probably piggyback on that a little bit and say, man, it seems so obvious, but talk to your parents. Like, just have conversations with them. Call them, FaceTime them, just be in touch, send an email, reach out. Like, I've heard of too many stories now where they've gotten an email from someone in a foreign country that says, hey, we just need you to wire us some money to help us out. And then the next thing you know, a lot of money has been spent, or someone's coming by there regularly who's selling a product, and you stop in to see mom or dad 3 years later, and somehow they have 75 birdhouses that they've spent $100,000 on, and you say, how did this happen? Like, I think just being in touch, and I really like the advice of talking to the neighbors. I think you can also talk to your parents' doctors, their physical therapists, their social workers. There's a big community network, but it starts with just kind of being involved and finding out who's in their lives, and kind of filling out that web a little bit and seeing kind of what's going on. And then once you kind of know who's in their lives, just maintaining consistent communication.
So one thing that that people have told me has helped is that they send social media videos to their parents. And so like them just slowly watching one and then two, that will slowly help them see that there are other people going through it, and that having that conversation is of most importance. So, okay. When I began caring for my mom, there were so few resources for me as a young person. For example, I had no 401k. Most young people have loans, and we haven't, started really working yet. So I guess my question is, what is being done to prepare young people to take care of their parents?
Yeah, I mean, I can jump in here. I honestly, from what we've learned talking to caregivers and looking at kind of the social and community landscape, there are resources out there, as Rani, you mentioned, and but not a lot is being done, I don't think, at a community or social level to prepare a wide range of people. This is not something young people have regular conversations about. This is not something that is the norm amongst millennials or younger, unless they're thrown into it. And people, make it work because they have to make it work, but it takes a huge toll. And I think, the sibling question is interesting. We've done some focus groups amongst younger caregivers or people who are about to become caregivers, and we've heard that this really takes a toll, or can take a toll, on sibling relationships, and just in terms of who ends up doing what and how this is distributed, the responsibilities, because the families did not have these conversations early enough. These conversations and who is doing what and who's responsible for what is not necessarily the norm in most families, and so it can put a strain on them. Ultimately, I think individual solutions are not necessarily the answer from where we sit, where I sit. It really, this is something that is, we're all going to have to deal with at some point in our lives, and our society and our infrastructure just isn't really set up for it. And so I think that is ultimately the solution, while, of course, beginning to have these conversations early on and normalizing aging and caregiving is definitely the first step.
Can I add one thing to that? I was going to just say, I was thinking, it's not only is it the social and the familial and the stressful situation of who's going to care and how's going to care and how it's going to be done. I've also seen now, because I've been involved in the real estate community for a couple of years, I've seen the toll that it comes to with the separation of assets, and typically people money grabbing at the end of someone's life. So siblings being concerned over who's getting what when it comes to monetary resources and physical artifacts. And so you get it's an interesting dynamic, because people are battling over what's going to be left behind, and that kind of intermixes with how the care is going to be done at the time. And it just really creates a really interesting dynamic on how to take care of someone and what's being given away, and a lot of just a lot of headbutting and a lot of ended relationships I've seen over it. And because socially, I think this is because socially we don't talk about it, and we haven't pursued the cultural conversation of what do we do at the end of life, because we're all trying to avoid death, even though none of us can. But we avoid it socially. It leads to situations where there's not good practice amongst people on how to deal with it, because we're not trained how to do it. So just a little 2 cents on top of that.
If I can jump in,
Yes.
I think that's incredibly important. Finances are super important. I'm kind of a closeted personal finance nerd myself, so I think about this a lot. Planning for your future, for financial aspects of care, and considering long-term care down the road, things like that. But part of what you just said, Dre, really investing in relationships and those conversations is so important. Really, the dialogue with family, extended family, friends, neighbors, and faith communities can be really important to that future network, because family is so frequently created. And last but not least, I would say that thinking about the future and planning for it is more than financial, right? It's also planning for your future care. And as you mentioned, Jacquelyn, we all are likely to need care at some point in our lives. And so really thinking about your advanced care needs and documenting them is super important, because, by the way, planning for your future, you're making life easier for potentially your future caregivers as well.
I segued us into let's see what our next question has. Okay.
I have a suspicion that one of my parents dipped into their retirement savings, and I'm not prepared to take on the financial burden of that. So how do I have the conversation with them to take their future more seriously?
Dre, would you like to start out?
Yeah, sure. This is challenging, right? If you saw the documentary, or if you've watched it, I'm kind of a type A control person as well, a little anxious. And I think what I learned is part of the fear of losing a parent someday, and my dad in this documentary, was the fact that it would be a financial burden at some point if the things weren't put in order before it got there. Like if the process ended up going to probate or something, and there would be some kind of messy legal situation or something of that nature. And so I think I learned that by my trying to control it, it doesn't really do a lot of good. To try to put some kind of boundary on him to what he can spend out of his money that he's earned over his life. And my dad is, if really make the clip, but he has a shed, and Eric saw as well, he has a shed out back that has hundreds, if not thousands, of items he's bought at yard sales, and he's decorated this shed. And every time he goes out and he tells me he doesn't have money to travel or go out to eat and do these things, but I watch this money be spent on these yard sales and this shed of oddities. And I've had to curtail this idea that I can really convince him to spend more frugally, so that at the end of his life, the end of his life care will be taken care of. Essentially, it needs to be a healthy conversation. But in my case, if a person doesn't want to prepare and save for the end of their life care, I've had a hard time coming to the reality that you can't make someone. And as a kid, and as their kid, or as your own human and your own individual, you have to kind of deal with that in your own way and prepare for it.
warning. The country, and not everyone can rebuild from that. And so I think that by taking care of yourself and planning your own care, you're then thinking of your children and or the people who will have the job of making sure that you're safe. And so I think that it's every person's personal job to make sure, because you really don't know exactly what will happen. Is there anyone else who would like to comment?
I just have a reflection that I wanted to share. This, in addition to the caregiving that we were talking about previously, one of the experts that we spoke with in Making Fast Forward mentioned she remembered going with her daughter for parenting classes and her baby that was to come, and that this is a commonplace thing that people prepare for, and they save and they plan. And I think because nobody wants to discuss this period of life and caregiving and possible future caregiving, that it's almost as though it doesn't exist. So there aren't ads on TV talking about saving for caregiving, or talking about long-term disability insurance in the context of the family. It's all about the self and doing it alone. So I think that that instance of it not even being out there, something to talk about, is another thing that inhibits anybody's willingness or ability to discuss it.
I'd love to add a quick thing, if I may. I'm sorry, Jacquelyn, just to what you said, Eric. I think for me, this really goes back to this idea that we don't think about that period in our lives, and people that are in that period or are heading into that period aren't necessarily considered as valuable to our culture and our society and our economy. They're not necessarily contributing members of the economy in the traditional ways that we think. And so it's almost like there's a population and a whole sort of time in all of our lives that is invisible, which leads to all kinds of problems, including, like you said, not planning for this, not talking about it. People are aging. Baby boomers are aging really, really quickly in this country. It's a lot of people, and so it's really actually quite a cultural gap, I think, that we don't have sort of cultural and community mechanisms set up to have these conversations, but for people themselves to feel empowered to plan for that stage in their lives.
Yeah, I was just thinking, what would it be like if you went to your financial planner and they suggested, instead of a college savings account for your kids, if they suggested a parent savings account for taking care of your parents as they had gotten older? It's an interesting concept, but it's something you don't see. And that's what we're kind of, I think Eric's working for, is like a shift of paradigm here. Like there can be small cultural changes that can help us shift the conversation. And that's just one example of that.
Or maybe
shifting the conversation.
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
I was just going to say, maybe we're planning for ourselves so that our children don't have to do that in the same way. Just to what you were saying, Dre, but to build on other options as well.
Mm-hmm.
A two-person component savings account.
So smart. So when you spoke about shifting the conversation, I think that that's really important, because I think if we don't, that will then breed resentment, which is what our next topic is on. So if you could please play the video for that.
At the beginning of the pandemic, I became a caregiver for my 90-year-old grandma, and it was really difficult to cope with feelings of resentment, trying to find the time for self-care and also seeking support from other family members. How do you recommend that individuals in my situation handle these difficulties? I want to maintain a healthy relationship with my grandma and also my other family members in the future. Thank you.
So this was said sooner, but there's not a structural system in place that supports those of us who give care yet. And I think that we need that. However, something that has helped me is not being on social media so much, because it's hard to see people living their lives when you don't have the same opportunity. It's also really important that I think you talk to your family and let them know exactly what's going on. I think it's very important that everyone involved in care should at least spend some time with the person that is being cared for, so that everyone knows what it's like, so that we aren't underestimating the amount of work that it actually takes to care for someone. And that way we will then value self-care more, because we all know exactly what it's like. Is there anyone else who would like to say something on?
Yeah, I'll say something. I would think it would stem from a place of being authentic in your relationships. I think it's okay to express things that are hard in a way that you're like saying to maybe friends and family. Obviously, not blaming the person you're taking care of for putting you in a situation of being a caregiver, but expressing, hey, sometimes it's hard, and having a relief valve, like a therapist or a friend or something of that nature. And I really like Jacquelyn's point of not focusing on how other people are living their lives, because when we get into that comparison game, it's a dangerous spot when you start seeing I would say the mirror that people put up on social media that kind of looks back everything that's positive and shiny and perfect, which isn't really true. And so trying to avoid this false reality that lives online and engage in a real reality and express yourself. And if you have resentment, kind of work through that and talk about it and talk to somebody you care about, because if those resentments are real, talking through them, there's probably something internally that needs to be brought up and explored. And having someone in your life you can work through that with would be, I think, very positive. And then you can grow to see why there's resentment there and what area that you need to maybe have some character growth or development in.
I agree with that. And, caring for someone else can be exhausting, especially if it's over a long period of time. So I think one of the things that can help any of us, perhaps, with the potential for resentment, which is real for anyone in this situation, is really building your own support circle, and also scheduling breaks. So, a few ideas include, we know it takes a village, right? And so asking family and friends for the specific ways that they might be able to help, like coming around, bringing a meal, being part of that community of support, as we keep saying, relying on others and bringing them in, as well as bringing them in for the person that you're caring for. And then there's kind of the other side of bringing in is having the ability to get away. So taking time off for yourself to do the things that really renew and refresh you. Going out with friends, maybe, whether it's exercise, or some people it may be gardening, but really taking some time to look after yourself, to sustain the care, that also you're offering. And then there's respite care as well that offers short-term breaks for caregivers. If it works for you, if you can afford it, for some people, there's hiring a home health aide to help at home. So there are, a variety of tools that can be put in place in some situations for some people that will make a difference for those caregivers and that really understandable burden or resentment that could grow.
So many great points. Handling resentment while caring for someone can be so complex. And I think that a lot of these suggestions are so helpful. So I'd like to inject a little hope into the conversation. Shida, I know that Caring Across Generations is running a campaign called Care Can't Wait. Could you just explain a little bit of that to us?
Yeah, I'd love to. So Caring Across is running and part of a campaign called Care Can't Wait, which is a coalition actually that is organizations around the country working to change policy as well as culture. And the framing is really care across the lifespan. So really trying to change policy to do with childcare, to do with paid medical and family leave, and to do with long-term supports and services. And the reason that this is all working together is part of what, we've already talked about. And Eric, you mentioned kind of trying to break down these silos, saying that, you may need care, elder care is this one specific thing, but actually saying we all will be needing and providing care at various stages in our lives. And here is sort of a toolbox of policies, as well as sort of cultural and community supports that could help us or should help us. And so that's kind of why we've come together with organizations that are working on all these different aspects of care. And we're sort of doing organizations that are already working on these things, but coming together in sort of a strategic way to say that actually for all of our families to thrive, for us to live, work, and age with dignity, we need all of these policies to support us. And we also need to change the way we actually think about this. And I guess the last thing I'd say that the Care Can't Wait Coalition is really pushing for, and Caring Across and my work is really pushing for, is around the value actually of multi-generational and intergenerational relationships. And that, there's actually value to them. So sometimes there are people, grandparents who may need care at some points in the day, but it could actually be taking care of their grandchildren at other points in the day. So it's not, of course, that's only for, very specific kinds of situations, but it's not always sort of a one-way thing. And that if we start thinking about this in a slightly different way, it could help us at the community level, but also at the policy level.
Yeah, if I may, building on that, I think it's a fascinating, and also from my perspective as a storyteller and filmmaker in making this project, it's an interesting challenge that we need to connect not only with people who might need care in the coming years, but their children, and reach such a broad audience that's so interconnected. And that's why with Fast Forward, we decided to be as inclusive as we could, and also create something that would appeal to multiple generations, to get those ideas out there. And I have to say, I'm envious. Our show was broadcast on PBS to a nationwide audience, but I heard recently, Jacquelyn, that in your social media video output that you've been doing on TikTok recently, one of your videos was viewed by millions. And I have to say I'm envious of that. And I think it's all of these little messages that we're all working together to get out there. Can we take a look? I think we might have a clip of yours.
So the other day, I found my mom walking around with a bottle of mouthwash, and she was sipping out of it. And this is how I handled this situation. I started by trying to explain why you can't sip mouthwash, but my mom has Alzheimer's, so logic isn't the strong point here. May I have it, please? Please? Thank you so much, and I'm going to replace it with something else that's going to taste even better, all right? Okay? You're the best. I love you. I'm always trying to think quick on my feet. I replaced it with something that hopefully made her forget the mouthwash altogether, and I have to put new locks on the cabinets.
Yeah, so that TikTok, I wanted to show people because it's everyday life. I think when people think about Alzheimer's, they think about mild memory loss, but not the inability to function. And so my goal is to spread awareness and educate, people as much as I can, because this disease is crippling for both the person being cared for and the person taking care of them. But yes, that TikTok has done pretty well. So
I have a question for you, actually, Jacquelyn. I was just curious. So one of the things we face a lot is that many people who we interact with on social media as Caring Across don't necessarily like to self-identify as caregivers, even though they are caring for someone. I was just wondering, what are sort of the top 3 things that you hear the most from, followers or people who comment or sort of message you or react to your posts and videos? And do people identify as caregivers, like after watching your videos?
That question is really interesting because I didn't identify as a caregiver until very recent. I think that the word itself just didn't fit me. I still felt young and cool and, all of that kind of stuff, which, I think which I am still. But I kind of had to redefine what care meant for me in order to make it more fun. So when people see my TikToks, they say, you guys are having so much fun, which we are. But like that was my way of just making that word fit me. So as far as the things that people are talking about, many people are scared to talk to their parents. Some see signs, but they don't know how to approach it. Many people are just burnt out, and most say, I thought I was the only one, which really lets me know that there are a lot of people out there who just feel like their life has become solely about caring for another person. And so the simple fact that my content helps them know that they're not by themselves helps me also, because that's how I felt. And so that's what a lot of the comments are. Thank you so much for that. So we're going to head into our next topic, which is one of my favorites, which is self-care. So if we could see what the video question for that is.
Hi, my question's for Jacquelyn. Jacquelyn, you come up on my feed all the time, and I love watching your videos. My question for you is, how do you fill your own cup when you are fully showing up for somebody else?
Yeah, so that's taken me time. I've been taking care of my mom now. I'm in year 5 now, and I just figured it out. I don't feel guilt now, but that took me a lot of time. And what I do now is I make sure that I work out because I know that that makes me feel like I did something for myself, and I make sure that I do that every day. On top of that, I schedule 1 day per week for me. So no matter whether I feel like I'm so tired and I can't, or you know, I make sure to take that time because it's important, and that time will then help me make sure that I'm not too stressed out or short tempered. This experience has honestly taught me that if I don't take care of me, then my mom will not be taken
Right.
care of at all. And so that's my answer. Dre, you taught a class on self-care. So I would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, as a clinical social worker and as a professor of social work at the university that I was teaching at, I noticed I was seeing a repetitive trend, right? Social work students, we typically become therapists or work in the end of life stages or with kids who are going through a struggling stage in their lives. You're typically caring for people. As a social worker, it's a typically a caring profession of some sort with people. And so I was seeing repetitious behavior patterns of kids burning out, going through depression, having anxiety, having like weight fluctuations, just the things that you would see with people having a hard time coping with kind of the career. And it is a really hard career. And so I said, hey, I need to develop a course on self-care. And Jacquelyn, you kind of made me think of the analogy that I'd always start with, right? If a plane's going down and you need to have your oxygen mask on before you put on your neighbor's oxygen mask, you need to be making sure you're getting your breath before you can help anyone and take care of yourself. And I learned some interesting things in that class because I went in there confident that I had my 12-week course and I had 12 forms of self-care that were researched by the book, including exercise was one of them, and that this was going to be the path and everyone was going to do it, and I was going to miraculously change these students' lives and they were going to be healthy professionals. And I learned some interesting things that self-care is what works for you, first of all, and it's different for every single person. So knowing what breathes life into you and being aware of that and being in touch with yourself, taking time to be quiet and feel your emotions and listen to what's going on and experience in any aspect of self-care is huge. So finding what works for you and then making a habit and a routine out of it. I'm reading a book right now called Atomic Habits. It's a very good book. And it talks about how to replace bad habits with good habits and just making self-belief statements like, instead of I do this because I want to care about myself, I am a person that cares about myself. I practice self-care. I do this, I care about myself and I care about others, and internalizing that and then finding a behavior that helps solidify that for you, whether it's mindful meditation, walking your dogs, building a model car. That's what I did during the pandemic. It was wonderful. Whatever it is for you that breathes life into you, and finding a repetitious way to get into that and make time for it, I think it's huge. And so, yeah.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to expound on that?
I would love to for just a second or two. First of all, I love what you said about figuring out what is most important to you. And we think of that as, what matters to you and what matters to your parents. And then the other, because that's what everything rests on, right? And the other thing that we haven't discussed yet, but really goes, Jacquelyn, to your point earlier about feeling isolated, about feeling like I'm the only one, and other people reaching out to you and also feeling like the only one, is that among the list of things that one can do, there also are support groups. And to Dre's comment, that may not be for everyone, but the concept of a support group, for those who find a group that's a really good match, it can be incredible, because that's where you rid yourself of that sense of isolation. Really feel like you've got a community of other people who maybe are a little bit ahead of you or a little bit behind you in a similar experience, but who really are sharing your not just concerns, but your experiences.
I totally agree. Support groups can be so helpful. So if I could tell a young caregiver one thing, it would be to pay attention to themselves, because it's so easy to lose yourself in the process. You know, I've met so many people who didn't know what to do after their loved one passed because they just dedicated their entire life to care. And so I guess my final question is, what would you guys like to say to a young caregiver?
Okay, I'll start. And I guess I can't just say strap in because it's going to be a wild ride. But, you know, we've talked a lot about things that can be difficult when caregiving, and really, you know, thinking proactively and taking care of your parent perhaps, or whoever it is that is needing assistance, and taking care of yourself. What we haven't really touched on, though, is that for so many people, while caregiving can be hard and sometimes isolating and can feel like a burden, for so many people, they actually describe the positive benefits of caregiving also, that it gives a lot of people a sense of purpose, that it sometimes strengthens relationships, because the act of caring for someone really is a demonstration of closeness and of love. And so I would want to actually highlight that as much as I would highlight the need for resources, and really make sure that we are not underestimating the positive side of that as well.
I guess other than kind of what's already been said, you know, we talked a little bit about, you know, finding support. I would say, like, find your care squad, whatever that looks like, whoever that is if it's long distance or on Zoom or in person, or your neighbors or your faith-based group. I would say to a young caregiver that what they are doing is out of love, but it is work, and it is valuable work, and it is work that actually, you know, it doesn't need to be monetized, but it is actually worth a lot. This is the work that makes other work possible, is kind of what we say about care. And so I would say that, just because sometimes when you're in the day-to-day, it's hard to see the perspective, and it might be helpful. And then the other thing I would say is that, you know, for the good and the bad, the joy and the burden, it doesn't have to be this way. There is actually, it is possible for there to be kind of infrastructure. And so when and if you have the time later on to get involved and get active, since you have the lived experience of being a caregiver, there's a movement to kind of change how the infrastructure for care. That doesn't necessarily change the day-to-day in every single way, but it could be different. And so that's just what I would say, in addition to all the really useful things that have already been said.
Now, building on that, I think at the end of Fast Forward, Leo mentions in his narration, what I discovered through this process was there's this, it was invisible, was not visible to them prior, but that there was this network of people working together, not always directly together, but a network of people around them working to help everybody age and give care and get care. And I know, in particular, everything we're hearing and all the perspectives we're talking through today, it's not easy when you're in it. But if there's one thing you can do, whether it's sharing one of Jacquelyn's TikToks to get the conversation started with someone that maybe you can connect to, and make these connections with those around you that you're close to or not, so that you're not alone in this. Millions of us are doing this, and will continue to do this throughout our lives. And whether it's sharing that or sharing Fast Forward, we're holding a national screenings campaign right now, which this is part of, and you could set up a screening for any size group, and we'll walk you through it. And you can share the film and have these conversations with people that you're close to, as well as all the resources that will be shared after this.
Yeah, I would probably sit down and tell a young caregiver that there's no perfect path of life, that there's not one way drawn it out that it should be that's going to lead to this idea of happiness and contentment, and that you can find meaning and character and wisdom and growth throughout both the trials and the celebrations in life. And so whatever they're handed as an opportunity to go into self-understanding and self-growth, and also growth in relationships. And like everyone has said before, maybe the opportunity to further a national initiative to try to bring awareness to an issue that we have kind of hidden under the rug as a culture.
Well, that brings us to the end of our presentation. Thank you. You guys were so great. I was sweating bullets the entire time, but there was no reason to worry at all, obviously. I appreciate everyone on the panel, and I'd like to recognize all of you who are giving care to a loved one. You are needed, valued, and appreciated. Thank you all for participating. And we have a short presentation of a few but mighty caregivers who spread awareness online through sharing their experience as well. So please enjoy. Have a wonderful evening.
You like me? I like you. I love you. Oh, I love you too. And what do I have to do? Nothing. Just stay beautiful. Okay, we'll try.
dementia. We thought he wouldn't sing anymore, but we recently discovered that he actually can still sing a little bit. Now,
hi y'all, I'm good looking.
Hello, I'm Consuela, and I am the founder of the Finding a Foothold community, and I host the Caregivers Finding a Foothold podcast. And I want to say thank you, caregivers, for all that you do.